Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Now, have you ever had a time in your life when you felt totally alone, kind of abandoned by God? I have. I recall a time when I was in my 20s when it was really particularly dark time in my life, and I was really questioning the very existence of God. And I was so unhappy, and I didn't see any way out of the circumstance in which I found myself. And so I went into a church to pray. I got down on my knees and I was crying and pleading with God to help me, to change me, to fix me. And when I left that church, I still felt abandoned and alone. And I think that's how Cleopas and his companion felt on the road to Emmaus. I mean, they had just witnessed the brutal execution of their friend Jesus, a friend whom they fully expected to free Israel from the bondage of the Roman occupancy. But rather than liberating Israel from the Romans, Jesus was killed by the Romans. And then some of the women in the group reported that his body was missing, and they claimed that he had been raised from the dead. But the disciples were not ready to believe that. And so Cleopas and his companion left Jerusalem, going to Emmaus, feeling alone and abandoned by God. But they were not alone at all. I mean, Jesus was with them the whole time. They just didn't recognize him. And the same was true for me way back when. I was not alone. Jesus was with me before I went into that church, and he was with me when I came out of that church. I just didn't recognize him. And these disciples at Emmaus did something that I never thought to do. They invited Jesus to stay with them. They didn't recognize him, but they invited him in. And that invitation enabled them to recognize him in the breaking of the bread. And the story of the road to Emmaus clearly foreshadows the Mass, as Jesus opens the scriptures for them on the way, and he is made known to them in the breaking of the bread. And that same thing happens at every Mass. At every Mass, we encounter Jesus in the word proclaimed. We encounter him in the bread broken and shared. But what about the rest of the week? How do we encounter Jesus between Sundays? Well, none of us walk this path of life alone. Jesus is with us always, as he was with Cleopas and his companion, as he was with me all those years ago. Jesus walks with us through our path of life, through all of our joys, all of our sorrows, but so often we fail to recognize him. We don't invite him in. When I left that church, I felt abandoned, not because Jesus left me, but because I had not opened my heart to him. I was expecting him to come and fix me without any effort on my part, as if grace was a transaction as opposed to the fruit of a relationship. Now, Jesus didn't abandon me. It was I who abandoned Jesus. And when I approach him in that way, it's no wonder I felt alone. So Jesus walks with us always, even when we don't recognize him. But when we don't invite him in, when we don't allow ourselves to see him, then it's easy to start to feel like we're abandoned, even though he would never abandon us. It's easy to feel like we're abandoned and to never ask the question, who is abandoning whom? And so Jesus would never abandon us. But when we invite Jesus into our lives, and when we realize that he walks this path of life with us through all our joys and all our sorrows, then we are able to bring Jesus to others. So how do we do that? How do we bring Jesus to others? Well, it's really pretty simple. Through love, compassion, and mercy, especially toward those whom we might fear or dismiss. So we live in a culture, a very polarized culture, where distrust of the other has devolved into demonization of the other. Whether the other is an immigrant or an unhoused person or a liberal or a conservative or any number of 1,000 other labels that we use for people these days. But we are not called to demonize. We're not called to distrust. We are called to love, period. And that is how we bring Jesus to others. That is how we help the world to recognize Jesus. And so today, as we gather in this sacred place to share this sacred meal, let us thank the Lord for never tiring of walking with us. And let us ask for the grace to be attentive to his voice, to invite him into our lives, into our joys and our sorrows, to recognize him in the word proclaimed and the bread broken and shared. And then, like those disciples whose hearts were burning within them, let's go forth from this place and share the love of Jesus with all those whom we encounter, especially those whom we view as other, so that through our words and deeds, all people might recognize Jesus.